There's something interesting happening in the world, which is exponential trends. And this is a classic example of an exponential trend. This is population growth. So we were, as a human species, able to populate this planet effectively through technological breakthroughs. So agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, information revolution. And we are on this very steeply accelerated exponential curve. So just keep this in mind, how these curves look like. There's an interesting piece to this, which is when you map these curves out and you compare them to what is called linear curves, there's two interesting pieces in this curve which happen. There's a crossover point, and we explore this in a minute. But the important thing to know about linear thinking is you are hardwired to think linearly, whereas a lot of the technology trends we're seeing today are exponential. So they become very hard for us to actually even grok. And I give you an example, very simple example. Imagine you're taking 30 steps, and we're taking 30 linear steps, one step after the other. In metrics, I'm from Germany, so we use this metric system. That's about 30 meters, and in imperial is somewhere in the 100 feet range. You have an idea how far this is. It's probably from me to the end of this room. Now imagine if you were to take 30 exponential steps. So every step is twice as far as the last one. I want to get your first number, which pops into your head. Don't try to do the math. Just tell me what the number is. How far do you get? Give me a guess. 250,000 miles. You are cheating. The typical response you get is very often something in the range of like a mile. The more adventurous are telling you, well, it's from here to Europe. In reality, it's 25 times around this planet. It's to the moon, back, and halfway to the moon again. That is what exponential deception is. You're just not wired in your brain capacity to really understand what exponential means. So if we're going back to this curve, now remember, you're thinking linearly. A lot of technology is actually moving exponentially. There's effectively three interesting pieces in this curve. The first piece is where the linear trend is higher, is expected to be higher than what the exponential trend in reality is. And we're calling this the age of disappointment. And the best example I can give you is Google Glass. So nothing against Google, I work there. I love these guys dearly. But the typical reaction to Google Glass you get from people is, you look like an idiot wearing it, the battery life is poor, the functionality isn't actually that great, and it's $1,500. So you expect it to be better than what it actually is, and you start to dismiss it. You're disappointed. This is a classic example of what happens with technology. Then something magic happens. Technology gets better and better, and you come to this crossover point, which we call the knee of the curve. And then you come to the age of amazement. This is when you can't even fathom the growth you're seeing in these product categories. Now, good entrepreneurs see this crossover point. And the classic example of the crossover point is when Steve Jobs, for the first time, went on stage and showed the world the iPhone. I was sitting in Berlin in a room where we had a live stream of that conference, and next to me was a young software entrepreneur, and he literally said to me, "This is the future. I'm going to build for this thing tomorrow." And he became one of the first entrepreneurs in Germany who built software for the iPhone. Really good entrepreneurs can anticipate this trend and can see these exponential trends. And this is anything and everything we're trying to do at Singularity University. So if you're not taking anything out of this class, this 20-minute course here, remember this exponential curve. Let me give you a couple of examples how this plays out in the real life. This is data which was compiled by Eric Schmidt, chairman of Google. What he did was he went to a research team and asked the research team, how much information did mankind produce until the year 2003? So if you take all the cave drawings, the works of Michelangelo, the music we composed, the works which are in the Library of Alexandria, and you were to digitize this, you get a number which is 5 exabytes. It's a 1 with 18 zeros. It's a very large number of data. The same amount of data in the year 2010 we produced in 2 days. All of mankind's data, 2 days. 3 years later, we produced the same amount of data in 10 minutes. That is what exponential curves look like. Now, if you take this on the other side, on the cost side, let's take the cost of sequencing the full human genome. This was first done in 1999 at an expense of about $3 billion US, and took us 7 years. Heroic effort of the Human Genome Project, completed and open sourced. In 2006, we did the same thing for about $10 million in a couple of months. This summer, a company launched a product which sequences the full human genome for $1,000 in a mere hour. There's people inside of Singularity University who will tell you that in about 5 to 10 years latest, you will sequence the human genome for a penny. So effectively, every time you flush the toilet, we will sequence your human genome because it's effectively become free. I give you another example, penetration of mobile phones, and this is the one you're probably most familiar with. It's still staggering to me. There's 7.1 billion people living on this planet. There's 7 billion mobile phone connections. So 7 billion mobile phone lines spread out across 3.45 billion people. Now, if you take the world's population and you subtract the people who are age 0 to whenever you get your first cell phone, 7 probably, 8, 10, and you subtract the people who are very old, and you subtract the really poor out of like the bottom of the very bottom of the pyramid, we have 100% cell phone penetration on this planet. This is staggering. And granted, these cell phones are dumb phones, they're feature phones, but still. So, we're taking this a step further. We talked about this age of disappointment and the amazement. Peter Diamandis has a framework which he calls the 6 Ds of disruption. And this is what happens when you look at exponential technology. You start out with the first D, which is it's deceptive. Because what you're seeing in the beginning is very slow growth. You see growth which is not even there. It doesn't even register. You're coming from 1 unit to 2 units to 4 units to 8 units. It just doesn't even register for you. So it's deceptive. You're basically dismissing it. When it hits this knee of the curve point, it becomes disruptive, massively disruptive in industries. Anything and everything which can be digitized will be digitized. And you know this better than anyone, but we're seeing this in industry after industry. Anything and everything which you can digitize will become digitized. Anything and everything which you can dematerialize will become dematerialized. A very simple example is the digital camera. If you're in the business of making point-and-shoot digital cameras, you're effectively out of business because obviously we're using cell phones these days. Another example for this is the torch, the flashlight. Nobody has a torch anymore because your phone has a little flashlight unit, and even since iOS, I believe 6, Apple built in a little function where I can just switch on the torch. So your business effectively became dematerialized. Then, once you have everything and anything digitized, it becomes demonetized. Money just gets out of the system. If I sequence the genome for 1 cent, US dollar cent, there's no money in the system anymore, at least not in this part of the value chain. And once there's no money anymore, it becomes democratized. You've got public access to it. So these are the 6 Ds of disruption. This is the stuff which happens when you come into a world where you see exponential trends. Now, let me take you through a little bit of a journey. And I'm calling this Tomorrow Today. I'm giving you a couple of examples of technologies which I see, or we are seeing, which are on this curve. They haven't yet reached, to a large extent, this kind of tipping over point, and just want to get you sensitized to this. And the examples I chose are hopefully relevant to you. We have many, many more examples in like any and every field. I chose the digital realm for you. What's important to understand about tomorrow's technology is, and this is if you run a business, this is a really important message. You can buy tomorrow's technology today. It's just expensive. This is not about inventing technology, being visionary, creating something which isn't there yet. You can buy anything today. It's just expensive. So let's start with mobile on location. And we talked about this. I know that you talked about this quite a bit, so we rushed through this a little bit. Payments. Apple Pay just launched in California. I used it the day it came out. It's fantastic. It's completely dematerializing my wallet, and it's dematerializing my credit card. So if you're in the credit card business, your business model has suddenly overnight changed. iBeacons, we talked about this earlier. These are iBeacons. You can buy them in China currently for $10. Once I have an iBeacon for $10, I can effectively just plaster them through my store because they're cheap. These things will, in 2 to 3 years, will be $1 each. And then you just like throw them everywhere. because you can. Don't cost you anything anymore. This is an example of a German company I work with. They're using iBeacons for heat mapping in physical stores. What's fascinating about these guys is they're actually mapping not only the customer flow, they're using this to, in real time, change physical displays. So they're literally calling their stores and say, hey, we're seeing customers moving more towards this left side. They see this particular display. Can you move this more prominently? They're also using the footage from their surveillance cameras to do mood detection. They look at your faces and detect in which mood you are in and change, for example, the music which plays in their stores automatically. So this is the stuff you can do once you have like ubiquitous sensors. This is the true revolution. This is a chip, which is the size, is roughly, in metrics, is about 2 millimeters square. This is a golf ball. This is a dimple in a golf ball. You see the size as in comparison. This chip comes from a company called Freescale. This is not only a CPU, it's a complete computer on a chip, and it has the compute power of an early stage Pentium. So if you bought a Pentium computer 10 to 15 years ago, like these really big things which you had to put underneath your desk and you could warm your feet on, this is now the size of 2 millimeters, and you can buy it for 75 cents. So we are starting to call this smart dust, because what you do with this stuff is, once it's 75 cents, I will make anything and everything which is electric smart, just because I can. And in a lot of cases, this might not make sense. The smart toaster is always the kind of like the joking example. But in many, many, many cases, it becomes really revolutionary. Think about like even light. If I make every single light bulb smart, so the light bulb sees if someone's in the room and can switch itself on and off. It can sense how light the room is from ambient light and can dim itself so that I have consistent light. Billions of dollars in energy savings right there. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're working on something which has an electric cable, I would think today, like I would literally go home and like take everything which has an electric cable and think about how would this look like if I would just put a computer in it? Because 75 cents later, you have. Let's go into the next stream, artificial intelligence. You might remember this. I grew up, I was in high school when this came out. This is Deep Blue. Deep Blue was the first smart computer which beat Kasparov in chess. This happened in 1997, if I'm not mistaken. What's interesting about Deep Blue is Deep Blue's effort effectively was crunching a huge amount of data. So this is effectively dumb big data. So you take a huge amount of data, which is chess is very easy. You can just compute every single opportunity you have and go very deep into like the potential tree, and then you make a calculation which is your best move. Deep Blue won very narrowly against Kasparov. So they had, in a match of 6, they had 3 draws, and then Deep Blue won 2 against 1 from Kasparov. Recently, this thing came out, Watson. I don't know if you saw this in Jeopardy. Watson is a computer from IBM, which takes this whole concept further, and what Watson does is it does reasoning. So Jeopardy is hard for a computer because it's the inverse. You don't need to find the answer, you need to find the question. Deep Blue is, Watson has reasoning capabilities. So Watson has effectively the capability to really understand the concept of the question. What's fascinating about Watson is 2 pieces. One is Watson destroyed the human components, absolutely destroyed them in this competition. And Watson is like millions of dollars of hardware, so for a lot of people it's out of reach. But IBM, talking about the notion of demonetization, IBM now offers you Watson as a service in a cloud compute, similar to what you do with an Amazon Web Service today. So we will see a lot of like very smart computers who will help us do reasoning, who understand human language conceptually, and then can basically make decisions and can, for example, guide buying decisions or can become real companions to us.